Well, good morning, students. In the previous class, we discussed about the measurement and scaling techniques. So, in this, we discuss the definitions and the meaning of measurements and why these measurements are important in research. And also, we discuss what are the various types of measurement scales are being used for research, where we discussed about the four types of measurement scales: the nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, and a ratio scale. And after that, we discussed about the errors in measurement. Why do we come across errors in measurement? Then we also discussed about the sound measurement. When do we call that our measurement system is very sound? Okay, that is known as the test of sound measurement. So there we discussed about the test of validity, test of reliability, and test of practicability. Okay, so these are all the things we discussed in detail in the previous class. Well, friends, today we'll discuss about the techniques of developing measurement tools. Now, techniques of developing measurement tools. Okay, this development of measurement tools involves four-stage process. It involved four-stage process. The first step is concept development. Second step, the specification of concept dimension. The third step is selection of indicators. And the fourth step is formation of index. Okay, so these are all the four steps are involved in developing any measurement scales for the research. Okay, consider the first one is the concept development. This means that the researcher should arrive an understanding of major concepts pertaining to his study. Okay, what ideas, what concept I have in mind with respect to my research study. So we need to identify those concepts and write down those concepts. That is known as the development of concepts or the identification of concepts for the research. The more apparent the theoretical studies, then the more pragmatic research, where the fundamental concepts are often already established. Okay, so in some research study the concepts are established. There you need not worry. Where in some of the researcher you are required to establish, okay, on your own concept. Okay, so that is known as the first step, known as concept development. Okay, we need to list out the concept in the purview of our research study. The second step is the dimensions of the concept. The researcher need to identify the dimensions, okay, for the concept which he has developed for his research. Okay, so in the first stage he is developing concepts. For that concept, how these concepts have many dimensions, many attributes, so that's to be identified. The task may be either accomplished by the deduction process or by adopting the more or less intuitive approach, or by an empirical correlation of the individual dimensions with the total concept and the other concepts. Okay. Then the third step is, once the dimensions of the concepts have been specified, the researcher must develop indicators. The researchers must develop indicators. So the indicators means the measuring of the concept elements. The indicators are specific questions or the scales and other devices by which the respondent's knowledge can be gathered, or the opinion can be gathered, or the expectations can be gathered or measured. Those are all called the dimensions. Those are called the dimensions, or those are called the indicators of the dimensions. Okay, for each dimension we need to develop the indicators by which how we can measure the characteristics or the attributes of the person or product. Then the fourth step is combining these various indicators into index. Okay, the formation of an index is the fourth step. When we have several dimensions of concept or the different measurements of the dimensions, we may need to combine them into single index. Okay, one simple way of getting an overall index is to provide a scale values to a responses and then sum up the corresponding scores. Okay, such an overall index would provide a better measurement tool than the single indicator. Okay, so that's why we need to combine the indexes or the indicators and develop an index for the measurement scale. Okay, friends, these are all the 4-step process for the development of measurement scale. Is it clear? Then, what is scaling? The researchers, we quite often face the measurement problem. Okay, especially when the concept to be measured are complex and abstract, and we do not possess the standardized measurement tools. Okay, in research we come across, okay, some of the situations or some of the cases we have a standard measuring instruments or devices and we can directly use it. Okay, we need not bother about the development of the scales. But in some of the research studies, okay, we need to develop the research scale. Okay, those research scales will be, okay, they are the complex and they are the abstract of some ideas. Okay, alternatively, we say that while measuring the attitudes and the opinions, okay, we face the problem of their valid measurement. Similarly, the problem may be faced by a researcher, of course, in a lesser degree, while the measuring physical and instrumental concepts are available. Okay, the one should study some procedures which may enable us to measure the abstract concepts more accurately. Okay, when the scales are not available. So there the challenge is there for the researcher to develop scales. Okay, for developing a scale or the measurement scale, we need to use the 4-step process which I discussed now. Using those, you develop scales for the complex problems. Okay, so once again I tell you the meaning of the scaling. Okay, the scaling describes the procedure of assigning numbers to various degrees of opinions, attitudes and other concepts. This can be done in 2 ways: making the judgment about some characteristics of the individual and then placing him directly onto the scale that has been defined in terms of their characteristics. Okay, the second one, constructing the questionnaires in such a way that the score of the individual responses assigns him a place on a scale. it may be stated here that the scale is continuum, consisting of the highest point in terms of some characteristics or the preferences or favorableness, and the lowest point along with the several intermediate points between the two experiments points. There will be highest point and there will be lowest point on the scales, and in between the scales, so there will be some points. Okay, so these scale points portions are so related to each other that when first point happens to be the highest point, the second point indicates higher degree in terms of a given characteristic as compared to the third point. Okay, remember, assume that we have a scale which has got highest point and which has got lowest point, and assume that there are some other points. Okay, there are some other points. Assume that 4, 3, 2, 1 is lowest, 5 is highest, 3, 4, 3, 2. So these 3 points. Okay, I repeat once again, the scale point portions are related to each other, and when the first point happens to be the highest point, the second point indicates the higher degree in terms of the given characteristics compared to the third point in the scale, and the third point indicates a higher degree as compared to the fourth, and so on. Okay, the number for measuring the distinction of degree in the attitudes and opinions are thus assigned to individuals corresponding to their scale positions. Okay, so at this point it is better to understand when we talk about scaling techniques. Okay, hence the term scaling is applied to the procedure for attempting to determine the quantitative measurement of subjective abstract concepts. Okay, once again I repeat, the scaling is an applied to a procedure of attempting to determine the quantitative measure of subjective abstract concepts. The scaling has been defined as the procedure, the assigning of numbers, the procedure for the assigning of numbers or the symbols to a proprietary of objects in order to impart some of the characteristics of numbers to the properties in question. This is what the definition of scaling. Once again I repeat, scaling has been defined as the procedure for assigning of numbers, okay, or the symbols to the property of the objective in order to impart some of the characteristics of the numbers to the properties in question. Okay, assume that there is a scale which represents 5-point scale. The 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. Okay, in between we have 4, 3, 2. Okay, 4, 3, 2. How they are being differentiated I already explained. Okay, see, the 4 is being compared to 3 and 3 is going to be compared to 2. So then 2 is going to be compared to 2. So like that, relatively being categorized on the scale. Okay, on the highest degree of measurement. Okay, then scale classification basis. Okay, we have the classification of scales. The scaling procedures may be classified, okay, in the following ways. Okay, you take down the point as the classification of scales. The first one, the classification based on subject orientation. That is the first one. The second one is response forum. And the third one, degree of subjectivity. And the fourth one, scale properties. Fifth one, number of dimensions. Sixth one, scale construction techniques. Okay, these are all the 6 classifications of the scales. Okay, so now we'll discuss about the first one, the subjective orientation. Under this, under this scale may be designated to measure the characteristics of the respondents. Okay, characteristics of the respondents who completes it or judge the stimulus object which is presented to the respondent. Okay, that is known as subject orientation. The second one is response form. Under this, we may classify the scales as a categorical or comparative. Categorical or comparative. Categorical scales are known as rating scales, and these scales are used when respondents scores some subject without direct reference to the other subjects. Okay, that is called as categorical scales, and they are also called as rating scales. Okay, we'll discuss in detail what are rating scales and categorical scales in the next class. Under the comparative scales, which are also known as ranking scales. Okay, those are called as, the categorical scales are called as rating scale, whereas comparative scales are called as ranking scales. The respondent is asked to compare two or more objects in this case, whereas in the previous case, no comparison is being made. In this sense, the respondents may state one object is superior to the other, and the three models of pen rank in order 1, 2, 3. Okay, the essence of ranking, in fact, relative comparison of certain property of two or more objects. Okay, those are called the response form. The third one is known as degree of subjectivity. Degree of subjectivity. With this, the scale data may be based on whether we measure subjective personal preferences or simply make non-preference judgment. So this is known as degree of subjectivity. Here, the scales will be based on the measurement of subjective personal preferences, subjective responses. Okay, this simply makes the non-preference of the judgmental responses. The fourth one is scale properties. Considering scale properties, one may classify the scales as nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, and ratio scales. Okay, we discussed in the previous class what are nominal scale, what are ordinal scales, what are interval scales, and what are ratio scale. Even I give the examples also for these scales. Okay, how they are being used by the various researchers in the research study. Okay, those are called as scale properties. And the next one is number of dimensions. Okay, in respect of these bases, the scales can be classified as unidimensional and multi-dimensional scales. Okay, then what do you mean by these? Under the unidirectional, we measure only one attribute of the respondent or of an object. Okay, here one dimensional means we measure only one attribute of the respondent or the object, whereas multi-dimensional scaling recognizes that object might be described better by using the concept of attribute space of n dimensions rather than single dimension continuum. Those are called as the multi-dimensional scales. Okay, I hope you will be clear about the single dimensional scale and multi-dimensional scales. Then we discuss the last one about the scaling classification, the scale construction techniques. Okay, the scale construction techniques involves 5 main techniques by which the scales can be developed. The first one is arbitrary approach. The second one is consensus approach. The third one is item analysis approach. The fourth one is cumulative scale, and the fifth one is factor scales. Okay, then what do you mean by arbitrary approach of scale construction technique? In this approach, the scale, the scale is developed on ad hoc basis. Okay, there is no formal procedure of developing scale called as arbitrary scale. So this is the most widely used approach, and it is presumed that the such scales measure the concepts for which they have been designed, although there is a little evidence to support such assumptions. Okay, the second one is the consensus approach. Here the panel of judges evaluate the items chosen for the inclusion in the instrument in terms of whether they are relevant to the topic area or unambiguous in implications. Okay, those are called the consensus approach. Here the point or the item is to be passed to the judges for the evaluation, whether to be included or not in the instrument have to be decided. And the third one is item analysis approach. Here the number of individual items are developed into tests which are given to a group of respondents. Okay, this similarly the single consensus approach, we use single items. Here the multiple items are being developed, and these multiple items are to be discussed or the circulated among all the groups of respondents, and we need to finalize which items are to be included in the scale, which items are to be not included based on the response of the group. And the fourth one is known as cumulative scale, where chosen on the basis of their conforming to the sum ranking of the items with ascending and descending discriminating power. Okay, these such scales are called as cumulative scales, where they are being arranged from ascending or descending. The fifth one is factor scales, may be constructed on the basis of intercorrelation of the item. Okay, intercorrelation of the item, which indicates that common factor accounts for the relations between the items. Okay, here the relationship or the correlations has to be established between the two items, and then they have to be put on the scale. Such scales are called as factor scales. Okay, guys, with this I finished the today's class. Okay, I hope you understood. Okay, if I keep on pumping all the concepts and ideas, okay, you may not be remembering. So that's why, okay, today I stop about this information about scaling. Okay, and I repeat what all the things I covered today. I covered today how the measurement tools are being developed, okay, by using the four concepts, four steps process, that is concept development, specification of the concept dimension, selection of the indicators, and formation of the index. And also we discussed about the meaning of the scaling, and also what do you mean by the scaling, and how the classification of scales are being done. Okay, that is subjective orientation, response forum, degree of subjectivity, scale properties, number of dimensions, and scale construction techniques. Okay, these are all the things I covered today with some of the examples. So guys, again, you go through the videos 2 to 3 times to understand better and make the points and submit when the class reopens. Okay, when the class reopens. And also have the books. Okay, these books you need to collect when you come to the college. Okay, you take down the questions which you are expected to answer. Identify the steps involved in developing a measurement tools, and discuss in detail each step. Next question. what is scaling, and how the scale classification is done, how the scale classification is done. Question one. Identify and discuss in detail. Next question. Identify and discuss 5 main techniques which are being used to develop scale construction and discuss in detail. Okay, guys, so you need to answer these questions, and this is an important chapter in concerned with the measurement of our research study. Okay, then I'll be continuing some more. I'll be taking another 1 or 2 classes about this measurement techniques, okay, where in detail we'll be discussing about what do you mean by ranking scales, what do you mean by rating scales, okay, and how they are being developed and how they are being used in industries, okay, for the measurement of certain parameters. Okay, bye guys, have a good day, take care.